Okay, so in Jujutsu Kaisen, the timeline can get slightly confusing, which is why today we're explaining everything from the anime in the order it actually happened. By doing things this way, you'll directly see how Season 2 connects to the JJK movie, how the movie connects to Season 1, and how Season 1 goes full circle by connecting back to Season 2. However, one important thing I wanted to explain before we get into it is the existence of cursed energy. If you know how cursed energy works already, then you could just skip ahead to the timestamp on screen, but for everyone else, understanding cursed energy is the key to understanding the whole show. In JJK, cursed energy is a mystical power source created from negative human emotions. For the most part, this power is usually only found in Japan, but it should be said that Japanese civilians don't know how to control it. As a result, cursed energy leaks out of their bodies whenever they feel upset or angry, and over time, this leaking cursed energy merges together to form cursed spirits. Even though 99.9% of people can't see them, these spirits kill thousands of people each year, and the only ones trying to fight back are Jujutsu sorcerers. For context, sorcerers are a special type of human whose brains are wired differently, allowing them to see curses and harness their own cursed energy. The most talented sorcerers are also usually born with a curse technique, which is a unique ability that varies from person to person. For now, I'd say that's pretty much everything we need to know in case you didn't know that already, so without further ado, let's get into the timeline. To start things off, the timeline begins in the year 2006 when Gojo was a student at Jujutsu High. At the time, Satoru was only 16 years old and was significantly weaker than the guy who we meet later on. For example, Teen Gojo had no idea how to heal himself with reverse curse technique, meaning he also couldn't do curse technique reversal or hollow purple. Now, despite that, he was still the strongest pupil at Jujutsu High alongside his classmate Suguru Geto. Unlike Gojo, Geto came from a regular family of non-sorcerers, but by some miracle he was born with arguably the most adaptable curse technique in history. The name of this power was Curse Spirit Manipulation, and it gave Suguru potential to absorb an infinite number of curses, including powerful special grades, and then control them like his own personal army. Although the technique has some drawbacks that we'll explain later on, for now all we need to focus on is the process of absorbing curses. According to Geto, each curse tasted like a rag used to clean up vomit, but there were two reasons why he was willing to make this sacrifice. Reason 1, Suguru believed that in society the strong should protect the weak, hence why he wanted to use his ability to protect non-sorcerers. Reason 2, even though no one could relate to his experience of eating curses, his friendship with Gojo meant that Geto never really felt alone. Sadly, one day all of this began to fall apart when the students were sent on a mission to rescue this teenage girl. In the world of Jujutsu, Riko Amanai had various assassins trying to kill her, and to understand why, there's a bit of ancient history we have to know. At least 1500 years ago, but possibly even earlier than that, a sorcerer called Tengen was born with a technique that made her immortal. The downside to this immortality was that she still grew old like a normal person, and eventually that became a problem. After 500 years of aging, her technique started evolving her into something not human, and this was bad because if the transformation was complete, then she might lose control and destroy mankind in the process. Therefore, to prevent that from happening, once every 500 years, Tengen would reset the age of her body by merging with someone else. These mergers are what have allowed her to stay human for so long, but importantly, it can't just be done with any random person. To merge with Tengen, a person needs to have compatible DNA, and this rare type of individual is known as a star plasma vessel. In 2006, Riko was the vessel of this generation, although like I said, there were assassins trying to get rid of her. The first group of assassins was an organization named Q, who were trying to change Jujutsu society by forcing Tengen to evolve. By contrast, the second group trying to kill Riko was the Time Vessel Association, who were mainly non-sorcerers that worshipped Tengen. To be specific, followers of this religion thought that Tengen was a god, and they didn't want their god to become tainted by merging with a regular human. For that reason, the group hired an assassin called Toji Fushiguro, whose job was to terminate Riko before the merger could happen. An interesting fact about Toji is that his dad used to be the leader of the Zenin clan, but Toji himself left the family after suffering from years of abuse. From a young age, the Zenin bullied him due to his lack of talent, since he was the only known person on Earth to have no cursed energy. Generally speaking, the top sorcerers have mountains of cursed energy, while even non-sorcerers have tiny amounts. So yeah, Toji was just an embarrassment to the clan. However, what the Zenin failed to appreciate is that in exchange for zero cursed energy, Toji was blessed with superhuman strength and sharp senses that enabled him to see curses. These gifts made him incredibly dangerous, but to kill Riko, he still had to get past the strongest sorcerer team. Within hours of being given their mission, Geto saved Riko from Q's assassination attempt, while Gojo defeated their best soldier and caused the group to break up. From here, the plan was to safely bring Riko to Jujutsu High, but things began to go wrong when she chose to visit her school friends one last time. The reason this was even allowed was because Tengen gave orders to do anything Riko wants, since the merger wasn't scheduled to happen for 2 more days. Now, predictably, while at school she was targeted by assassins again, only this time the killers were recruited by Toji. As part of his master plan, he knew that if Gojo was at full strength, then it'd be impossible to get close to his target. That's why, to reduce Gojo's stamina, he offered 30 million yen to anyone who could kill the girl within 2 days. The genius of this plan is that firstly, you get a bunch of people fighting for you, and you don't even have to pay them since they're guaranteed to lose. Secondly, the existence of the bounty itself made Gojo paranoid, to the point where he didn't sleep for 2 nights out of concern for Riko's safety. This meant by the day of the merger he was exhausted, and when the bounty finally expired, he thought it was safe to let his guard down. That mistake is how Toji was able to catch him by surprise in this scene, and after a very tactical fight, Gojo dies. At the same time, deep below Jujutsu High, Riko was almost ready to do the merger, but at the very last second she was given a choice. As we know, being the Star Plasma Vessel is a big sacrifice, because you're essentially asking a child to give up their whole life so that Tengen gets a new body. From the start, Gojo and Geto weren't the biggest fans of this idea, and they agreed to support Riko and possibly even fight Tengen if she decided not to merge. When presented with the option to have a normal life, an emotional Riko did choose to go back home. However, the moment was ruined when Toji showed up and killed her. Yeah, this guy is just really good at his job. What followed this was an epic battle between Geto and the assassin, and during this fight we saw one of the drawbacks of cursed spirit manipulation. For context, one reason why Toji was such a great hitman is that he had a one-of-a-kind collection of weapons that could negate cursed techniques, boost his own strength, and cut directly into the soul. These tools were all stored inside of a small cursed spirit that he tamed, but from Geto's perspective, he assumed that he'd be able to absorb it. Sadly, what he didn't know at the time is that in rare cases where a cursed spirit has a master, the curse can only be absorbed once the master is defeated. Due to this miscalculation, he got ripped apart by Toji, and the only reason he wasn't killed is because if he died, all of the curses inside him would be released. Understandably, Toji didn't want to deal with that, and so he left Jujutsu High with Riko's dead body and brought her to the Time Vessel Association. There he received the money they owed him plus a bonus on top, but on the way out he was confronted by Gojo. As it turns out, when Satoru was on the verge of death, he put everything he had into learning reverse curse technique. Quick reminder, reverse curse technique is when you multiply negative cursed energy with more negative energy to create a positive energy that can repair the body and fuel cursed techniques. With his life on the line, Gojo finally realized how to do this, allowing him to heal from his injuries and awaken a new level of Jujutsu. This upgrade is how he was able to destroy Toji with Hollow Purple, although before the assassin died, he revealed something interesting. For context, 4 years earlier, Toji's wife gave birth to a son called Megami, but she died shortly after he was born. Her death basically led to Toji spiraling out of control, and so to make some money, he agreed to sell his son to the Zenin clan. The deal was that Megami would be handed to them once his curse technique appears, but deep down, Toji knew it'd be an awful place to grow up. That's why, with the final chance to fix his mistake, he told Gojo about the situation, hoping he might interfere. Now, switching back to Geto, after regaining consciousness, he also went to the Time Vessel Association, where Riko's murder was being celebrated by the followers. In this moment, Gojo was tempted to just wipe out everyone there, but it was Suguru who convinced him there was no point. Even though Geto was equally disgusted by these people, killing them would have gone against his belief that sorcerers should protect the weak. That said, because of everything that happened on this mission, his beliefs and his life would drastically change over the next year. For instance, now that Gojo had surpassed him by learning reverse curse technique, the two friends stopped working as a team. Instead, Satoru went on missions alone since he didn't need any help, leaving Geto to deal with other less important threats by himself. Gradually, this led to his mental health falling off a cliff, given that most days he was just on his own eating curses, and he began to question why he was even doing this. Originally, his main aim was to protect non-sorcerers, but from experience, he now knew that many of these people didn't deserve it. Then, at the height of his depression, Suguru had a life-changing conversation with Yuki Sakumo. Back in 2007, Yuki was the most powerful sorcerer besides Gojo, and her dream was to create a world with no cursed spirits. If you watched the full intro to this video, then you know that spirits are born from cursed energy leaking out of normal people. Therefore, Yuki theorized that to stop curses being born, you have to somehow remove cursed energy from the world so that everyone becomes like Toji, or you teach mankind to control cursed energy, thereby preventing any leaks. During this discussion, Geto realized that a third option would just be to exterminate all non-sorcerers, and Yuki even admitted this might be an easier way. As a side note, something else she revealed was that despite Riko's merger not happening, Tengen hadn't become a threat to humanity like they feared. Shortly after this meeting, a young Jujutsu High student called Haibara was killed on a mission, with Nanami narrowly escaping, and once again, Suguru questioned if all this suffering was worth it just to protect non-sorcerers. In September of 2007, Geto then finally snapped, massacring an entire village of non-sorcerers, with the exception of 2 young girls who were able to see curses. After this day, he raised them like they were his own kids, while abandoning any ties that he had to Jujutsu High. When confronted about this by Gojo, Suguru explained that his vision was to build a society where only sorcerers exist, and he knew it was possible because Gojo himself has the potential to do it. In other words, if Geto could be as strong as Gojo, then it'd be pretty easy for him to wipe out non-sorcerers, so the fact it can be done is why Suguru wanted to give it his best try. Following this, the 2 friends then went their separate ways, with Satoru eventually going on to cancel the deal that Toji made with the Zenin. Instead, he made arrangements so that Megumi and his stepsister were taken care of, as he planned to develop Fushiguro into a powerful ally. Meanwhile, Geto used brute force to take over what remained of the Time Vessel Association. This move gave him access to huge financial resources, and for years he gathered followers who shared his beliefs. In 2017, Geto and his minions then took the first steps towards eradicating non-sorcerers, which brings us to the events of the JJK movie. Unsurprisingly, Geto was the villain of the film, while the hero was a brand new student at Jujutsu High. The name of that student is Yuta Okotsu, and to understand why he's so important, it's worth examining his backstory. At a super young age, Yuta was diagnosed with pneumonia, and while receiving treatment at the hospital, he bumped into a girl called Rika Orimoto. Rika was an orphan whose parents died in mysterious circumstances, and after their first meeting, both her and Okotsu ended up going to the same school. Over time, the 2 of them became incredibly close, to the point where Rika took her mom's old wedding ring and used it to propose to Yuta. This scene was important because not only did he agree to marry her in the future, but he specifically says that they'll stay together forever. When Rika was then unexpectedly killed in a car crash, her soul morphed into a vengeful cursed spirit that permanently attached itself to Yuta. In this form, Rika followed him everywhere he went, and for the next 6 years her spirit would violently attack anyone who she thought might be a threat to him. This is what brings us to the very start of the JJK movie, where in November of 2016, Yuta was being harassed by 4 bullies at school. In response, Rika crushed the bullies by stuffing all 4 of them into a single locker, and allegedly they managed to survive, even though the movie showed them looking like this. Anyhow, following this incident, Jujutsu High decides that they should probably do something about Yuta, and in total they send 4 sorcerers to deal with him. Although the names of the sorcerers weren't revealed, we know that at least one of them was grade 1 level and was assisted by multiple grade 2s. In spite of that, it's confirmed that Rika took them all down, which gives you some idea of just how powerful she is. Fearing what she might do next, the higher-ups organized Yuta's execution in the autumn of 2017, where they planned to kill him so that Rika's curse would vanish. Okotsu agreed to this proposal since he was tired of hurting people, and at one point he even tried to execute himself before Rika stopped it from happening. With very few options left, the higher-ups eventually called in Satoru Gojo, aka the strongest sorcerer alive, and his job was to teach Yuta how to control the curse. After speaking with Gojo, Okotsu then transfers to Jujutsu High, where he joins the existing class of first-year students. At the time, the first years were Maki Zenin, Panda, and Toge Unumaki, with the human first years being 15 and 16 years old. When Yuta initially joined their group in 2017, the first years immediately felt Rika's presence, since she's stronger than any curse they would have seen in their lives. The thing you need to remember about cursed spirits is that they're made from a substance called cursed energy, and so the more cursed energy a spirit has, the tougher it becomes. In Rika's case, she's described as having endless amounts of cursed energy, making her essentially invincible and definitely more dangerous than any other curse we've seen in the anime. For that reason, Maki had absolutely no respect for Yuta in the beginning, because he acts like a timid weakling even though he has this unbeatable curse protecting him 24/7. Regardless, Gojo thought it was a good idea to send these two on a mission together, and later that day they head to an elementary school. The reason this school is relevant is because two of the kids recently went missing, and Gojo suspects that a curse was responsible. Earlier I explained how all curses are made from cursed energy, and what this means is that in places like hospitals and schools where people feel all kinds of negative emotions, it's normal for people's cursed energy to leak and form cursed spirits in these specific locations. It's the job of sorcerers to then exorcise those spirits, and in this scene Maki single-handedly destroys 3 of them, while a terrified Yuta just watches on. Following that, they enter the school to search for these missing kids, and although there are curses everywhere, none of them try to attack. Maki quickly realizes that it's because the curses are afraid of Yuta, and after checking his student ID, it's revealed that he's classified as a special grade sorcerer, which is the highest ranking that any sorcerer can achieve. In the entire world, only 3 other special grade sorcerers exist, with Gojo being one of them, so for Yuta to be on that level is a massive deal. In any case, out of nowhere, a giant curse appears, and unlike the other spirits, this one doesn't hesitate to attack the first year students. Both Maki and Okotsu are then swallowed by this thing, and on the inside of its stomach, they find the missing kids who they'd been searching for. At this stage, both children were in a really bad condition thanks to the effects of the curse, and to make things even worse, Maki herself also starts getting affected. This left Yuta as the only person who could save them, which was bad news for everyone since he still had no clue what he was doing. That's why a frustrated Maki gives him a pep talk since their lives are literally depending on it, and luckily he thinks of a plan soon afterwards. By putting on the engagement ring that Rika gave him, it strengthens his connection to her cursed spirit, and because of that he was able to ask to borrow her power. Up until now, Rika would just kind of emerge whenever she felt like it, but this occasion was the first time Yuta summoned her to do something for him. She then proceeds to tear apart the other cursed spirit limb from limb, giving Yuta the chance to free himself and carry everyone else to safety. In this scene, Okotsu makes the decision to change as a person, and from this moment onwards he was more determined than ever to break Rika's curse. Once the curse is broken, she'll no longer be stuck in this form, and her soul will finally be free to pass on to the afterlife. However, the challenge here is that because her cursed spirit is basically invincible, you can't just destroy it in the same way you would destroy a regular curse. Instead, what Yuta has to do is unravel her curse step by step, and I'll explain how. The basic concept is that Yuta's ring enables him to borrow small parts of Rika's curse, and so once that's done, he can channel that tiny curse into this katana. With enough practice, the aim is to keep channeling larger and larger amounts of Rika into the sword, until her spirit is fully under his control, and once that happens, the curse will officially be broken. As a side note, following the mission at the elementary school, there are 2 important things you need to know. Number 1, later that night, a mysterious figure showed up at the school, and based on his shadow, we can tell that this is Suguru Geto. As we know, Suguru's mission was to wipe out every normal human on the planet, and he spent the last decade building his army. Importantly though, they still weren't strong enough to accomplish their goal, since if they tried anything, then they'd be crushed by Jujutsu Society. This is where Rika comes in, because as the most powerful curse, if she was on their side, their mission would suddenly become a lot more realistic. Using his curse spirit manipulation, if Geto was to kill Yuta, then Rika's immense power would all transfer to him. That's why Suguru was eager to test what she could do, hence why he laid this trap for her at the elementary school. The second thing you need to know is that later on, when Maki and the kids were recovering in hospital, Yuta came to a realization. Until now, he just assumed that Rika had chosen to curse him, but in reality, he might have been the one who turned her into a curse, when he said that they'd be together forever. From Gojo's perspective, this theory was plausible, since he never understood how a seemingly normal girl turned into the strongest curse of the modern age. To find out the truth, he immediately opened an investigation into both Rika's background and Yuta's background, as he hoped that this information might reveal clues about where her power comes from. Anyway, flashing forward 3 months, in that time, Yuta had been consistently training with his katana, and even took part in the 2017 Goodwill event. The Goodwill event is when students from the Tokyo branch of Jujutsu High face off against students from the Kyoto branch, and in season 1 we found out that Yuta and Rika took part in the 2017 edition. According to the manga, the Tokyo students easily secured the win, largely thanks to Rika dominating the event, which is why you might have noticed that in season 1, Todo was eager to get revenge. Regardless, following the 3-month time skip in the JJK movie, Gojo decides to send Yuta on a mission with Toge Inumaki. Out of all the first years, Toge is by far the most experienced, and his curse technique is known as curse speech. To put it simply, it's an ability that makes anything he says happen in real life, with an example being how if he tells someone to stop moving, then that's exactly what's going to happen. As you can imagine, a technique like this could be useful in a million different ways, but the downside is that Toge can't have normal conversations. To avoid hurting people, he only speaks using safe words like salmon, kelp, and other rice ball ingredients, and at this stage in the timeline, Yuta didn't really understand anything he said. The two students then traveled to their mission location, which was an abandoned shopping center full of low-level curses. The job here was for Toge to exercise those curses by himself, while Akotsu's role was mainly to stand there and watch and learn. Before they got started though, Gojo warned Yuta not to let Rika out on this occasion, since the higher-ups didn't really like her unpredictability. If Akotsu was to let her go on another rampage, then it's possible they'd try to execute him even sooner than expected. Moving on, after entering the location, the first years encountered the swarm of curses who they were sent here to kill. Within seconds, Inumaki destroys every last one of them by telling them to explode, and just like that, the mission was supposed to be over. However, what they didn't know is that inside of the shopping center, Geto was secretly watching them from a distance. On this occasion, Geto's objective was to see Rika with his own two eyes, and so he ambushes them by using one of his cursed spirits. The plan was for Akotsu to get so overwhelmed by this that he'd have no choice but to summon her again, although this time things played out a lot differently than the elementary school. Towards the beginning of the fight, Toge warned Yuta to stay away since his inexperience made him vulnerable against a curse of this level. The problem though is that Inumaki himself was also vulnerable due to the side effect of his technique. Something you need to know about curse speech is that when you say powerful words like explode or blast away, there's always a chance that your throat might get damaged. If that happens, the only way to keep using curse speech is to take throat medicine, but Inumaki's medicine fell out of his pocket right next to the cursed spirit. Because of that, Yuta didn't want his classmate to try and fight this thing alone, which is why they do work together to take it down. Akotsu kicks things off by channeling a tiny part of Rika into his katana and then trying to slash Geto's curse. Even though the slash itself wasn't that deep, it gave Yuta an opening to retrieve the throat medicine and throw it to Inumaki. After recovering his voice, Toge then exercises the curse by crushing it to death, meaning Rika never needed to come out. By the way, I should mention that if Geto really wanted to, he could have just kept releasing more and more curses, but for some reason he chooses to let the first years escape. Hours later, Gojo then hears about the surprise curse that attacked his students, and he goes to take a look around the area for himself. During his inspection, he notices the residuals left behind by Geto, and as a quick note, residuals are just traces of curse energy that are left behind when someone uses their curse technique. Because Suguru and Satoru spent so much time together as classmates, Gojo instantly recognized these residuals, and soon afterwards he tells the principal. At the same time, Geto himself was making preparations for a war against Jujutsu High. In the present day, Geto has accumulated over 6,000 curses, including at least 2 special grades, not to mention he has an army of followers who I already mentioned. Now, if he was to add Rika to all of this, then Suguru believes he'd have a 99% chance of overthrowing Jujutsu High. Once that's done, he could finally achieve his goal of destroying all non-sorcerers, as in his mind, apparently not even Gojo would be able to stop him. That's why in this scene, Geto confidently arrives at the school and declares war against all of his former friends and teachers. To be specific, he tells them that on December the 24th, 2017, he's going to unleash 1,000 cursed spirits in Tokyo and another 1,000 in Kyoto, with each curse being given orders to massacre. The name of this war is the Night Parade of 100 Demons, and if that sounds familiar, it's because in Season 1, we found out that on this night, Todo played a big role in fighting Geto's army. Before we get into that though, after Suguru made his declaration of war, you'd expect that someone from Jujutsu High would try to stop him right there and then. However, although Gojo wanted to do something, there were 2 reasons why he couldn't hurt Geto in this specific moment. The first and most obvious reason is that Suguru threatened to kill the first years if Satoru didn't let him leave, but in my opinion, there is a second reason we need to factor in. Personally, I think it's fair to say that Gojo is fast enough to have killed Geto before anything happened to his students, but if he did that, there's a chance that all 6,000 of Suguru's curses might be released. This possibility was first mentioned by Toji Fushiguro, who refused to kill Geto back in 2006, purely because he didn't want to deal with all the cursed spirits that might come pouring out. To me, it's possible, if not likely, that Gojo came to a similar conclusion, and therefore allowed his former best friend to fly away. Moving on to December 24th, in both Tokyo and Kyoto, Jujutsu High had gathered nearly every sorcerer they had. Their mission was to exercise all 2,000 curses heading their way, but noticeably Yuta was left back at school. Due to Rika's unpredictable nature, there was a risk that if she was on the battlefield, she might end up destroying both sides. As a result, it was safer to just leave Okotsu behind, which is exactly what Geto thought was going to happen. All along, the true objective of the Night Parade of 100 Demons was for all the experienced sorcerers to be distracted in Kyoto and Tokyo, while Yuta is left completely alone. With that being the case, Geto casually marches into Jujutsu High, where the only one left standing between him and Okotsu is Maki. Later on, we'll explain why Maki is considered to be such a weak sorcerer, but for now, all we have to say is that her curse energy levels are so low that she can't see curses without wearing these special glasses. From Geto's point of view, this is exactly the type of person who he wants to eradicate, and so he quickly wipes her out with these centipede-looking cursed spirits. Meanwhile, over in Tokyo, Gojo begins to wonder why Suguru isn't on the front lines, and as he's thinking, he suddenly gets interrupted. I mentioned earlier in the video how Satoru requested an investigation into Yuta's background, and in this scene he finally gets the results. After hearing this info, it causes him to realize where Geto has to be, and so he teleports Toge and Panda back to Jujutsu High. I should point out that this move from Gojo was extremely calculated, since he knew these two never had a single chance of defeating Geto. Instead, the reason he sent them back is that he assumed they would lose, and he was hoping this would trigger Okotsu to get even stronger. Luckily for Gojo, that's exactly what happened, because when Okotsu found his classmates lying in a bloody mess, he instantly allowed Rika to come out. They both then easily destroyed a swarm of curses that Suguru sent towards them, before taking a quick break to heal the other first year students. The significance of this moment is that it showed Yuta using reverse curse technique, which is a skill that even Gojo struggled to learn at a similar age. Following that, Geto tries to take him down by unleashing another horde of curses, but this time Okotsu counters it by using cursed speech. Historically, cursed speech is a power that belongs to the Inumaki clan, but without going into spoilers, Yuta was able to replicate it thanks to a combination of Rika's help and his own curse technique, which wasn't specified in the movie itself, and he exercises all these spirits by ordering them to die. Now, back in Tokyo, Gojo was busy fighting against Miguel, who's an African sorcerer and one of Geto's strongest followers. Miguel's job was to stall Satoru for as long as possible so that his boss would have enough time to finish the job of capturing Rika. You might be curious how Miguel was able to survive this long in a battle against Gojo, and the answer is that he has a special weapon known as the Black Rope. The Black Rope has the effect of disrupting or cancelling someone's curse technique, meaning Satoru wasn't able to use Limitless to its full potential. An interesting detail is that although it took decades to make the Black Rope, it quickly burned away during this fight until there was literally none left by the end of the movie. Separately, in a nearby location, Geto's other followers were causing chaos, and these two girls are basically his adopted children. 10 years ago, when Suguru massacred the village, the reason he did that is because he found that some villagers were abusing Mimiko and Nanako. This was the key breaking point where he chose to prioritize the lives of sorcerers over the lives of humans, and they've been raised by him ever since. Speaking of Geto, back at Jujutsu High, he decides to personally fight Yuta himself, and if you've watched season 2, you'll notice that the curse on his shoulder used to belong to Toji. Back in the day, Toji used this curse to store weapons inside of it, and when Suguru gained control of the curse after Toji's death, he gained nearly every tool that Toji had. One of those tools was a weapon known as Playful Cloud, and with Geto's skill, he successfully used it to hold off Rika and Yuta simultaneously. However, in the end, Okotsu unlocks yet another level of his potential when he hits the villain with Black Flash. As you might know, Black Flash is a power-up that increases the strength of an attack by way more than double, and it requires an unbelievable amount of concentration. According to Todo, Black Flash occurs when a sorcerer makes contact and then adds cursed energy to that contact within 0.000001 seconds. Being that precise is the only way this power can be unlocked, which is why no sorcerer in the world can just use it whenever they want. While we're on the topic of Black Flash, over in Kyoto, Nanami unleashed 4 Black Flashes in a row against these cursed spirits, and in the process broke the world record. At the same time, Todo was in another part of Kyoto, and he single-handedly destroyed a special grade curse in addition to 5 grade 1 curses. To do all of that without help is a ridiculous achievement, and it clearly helped his reputation a lot since Fushiguro already knew who Todo was before they even met. Anyway, switching over to Jujutsu High, after recovering from a Black Flash to the face, Geto realizes that it's time to stop holding back. In order to kill Yuta once and for all, he summons this legendary special grade curse, and based on the context, it's safe to assume that this is the most dangerous curse he has. Following that, Suguru then combines every last one of his remaining curses, creating a black mass of pure cursed energy. This move is known as a maximum technique, which, as the name suggests, is when a sorcerer taps into the maximum potential of what their technique can achieve. In Geto's case, the overwhelming strength of 4,000 curses plus a legendary curse spirit, it should be enough to crush anyone, including Yuta at his current level. That being said, it was confirmed in the JJK manga that there is one method for any sorcerer to quickly improve, and it relates to binding vows. A binding vow is a contract where you sacrifice one thing in order to gain something else, and for Jujutsu sorcerers, the quickest way to level up is to offer your life as the sacrifice. Realizing that he doesn't have what it takes to defeat Geto's maximum technique, Yuta offers up his life to Rika so that they'll both be dead and then can be together in the afterlife. In exchange, he gains full control of her unlimited cursed energy, which manifests in the form of this purple orb. 1 second later, he and Geto then try to kill each other, and the resulting explosion is so intense it creates a mushroom cloud of pure cursed energy and leaves this giant crater behind. Ironically though, both sorcerers do end up surviving this deathmatch, although it's fair to say Suguru suffered the most damage. As he limps away from the battle, he remarks that Rika's power can change the world, and that next time he'll add her to his collection. However, before he can get away, Satoru finally shows up at the school, and you can tell from Geto's expression here that he quickly accepts he's about to die. During their final conversation, we learn that all of Suguru's followers managed to escape without being captured, while Gojo confirms that he knew Toge and Panda would lose to Geto, but he still trusted that his old friend wouldn't kill them. When we look at this scene in the context of how close they used to be, it is sad how their lives went in such drastically different directions, considering that when they were in school, Suguru always used to be the righteous one who cared about protecting humanity. For him to now be the one in a position like this isn't something that I don't think either of them would have predicted, but at the very least, it is meaningful that Gojo is his executioner, instead of it being Yuta who he barely knows. Just before Satoru finishes him off, he says something that we as an audience don't hear, but based on the clues that we've gotten from the author, it's likely that he said that Geto is still his one and only friend. Following that, Suguru gets executed by Gojo's limitless curse technique, while in a different part of the school, an unconscious Yuta wakes up. Because of the contract that he made with Rika, Akotsu was fully expecting to die in this moment, but in a surprising turn of events that doesn't end up happening. Instead, Rika's spirit abruptly turns back into her human self for the first time since she died, and Gojo arrives just in time to explain why. 3 months ago, when they first opened the investigation into Yuta's past, Jujutsu High had to dig really deep to find out the truth. What they eventually discovered is that Akotsu is the descendant of Michizane Sugawara, who was a legendary Jujutsu sorcerer from 1,000 years ago. If you want to know more about Michizane, then I'd highly recommend watching my other video where I explain his backstory and his connection to the Gojo clan, but for now the main point is that he was insanely powerful. That's why in the present day, Yuta has more cursed energy than any other living human, even more than Gojo, but because his family aren't sorcerers, he was never taught how to control it. Therefore, when Rika was hit by a car, Akotsu refused to accept her death, and since he was untrained, his curse energy awakened and flowed out of him, transforming her into this monster. To put it another way, all the unlimited curse energy that Rika has originally belonged to Yuta, but it passed to her when he accidentally made her into a curse. However, now that he's accepted her death and gained full control of her curse energy, which is what he was trying to accomplish from the beginning, Akotsu has done everything he needed to unravel the curse. This is why Rika transforms back to normal, and naturally, Yuta felt incredibly guilty for causing all of this trouble. Thankfully, Rika didn't really care. In fact, it sounded like she enjoyed her time as a cursed spirit, and as she passes on to the afterlife, she warns Akotsu not to join her anytime soon, implying that Rika wants him to have a long life, even if it means that they're not together. After this incident, Yuta stays on as a student at Jujutsu High, while the topic of him being executed never gets mentioned again. That being said, just 6 months later in June of 2018, the higher-ups were now trying to execute someone else. The name of this new victim is Yuji Itadori, who's a 15-year-old who knows nothing about Jujutsu. In order to understand why they want him dead, we need to flash back one day to Sugisawa High School. This place is where Yuji had recently started going to school, and in the last few months he became a member of the Occult Research Club. The aim of this small club is for students to theorize about paranormal activity, but in Yuji's case, there was a more personal reason why he joined. For nearly all of his life, he was raised by his granddad, Mr. Itadori, who's now currently in hospital on the verge of death. Because of that, Yuji wanted to join a club that required the least amount of commitment so that he'd have enough free time to visit the hospital after school. In episode 1, Yuji visits his granddad for the final time, and during their last conversation, it's implied that Mr. Itadori has no other friends or family who would want to be there. With his dying breaths, he basically warns his grandson not to end up alone like him, and he says that Yuji should use his strength to help people. Following that, Mr. Itadori quietly passes away, but it doesn't take long for a Jujutsu sorcerer to then show up at the hospital. The name of this young sorcerer is Megumi Fushiguro, and he was sent on a mission to find a dangerous object. For a bit of context here, 1,000 years ago there was an evil sorcerer called Sukuna, who was arguably the greatest of all time, and when he died, his soul was divided into 20 fingers. Each of these fingers contains a godly amount of cursed energy, and it just so happens that one of them was sealed inside a box at Yuji's school. Fushiguro's job was to retrieve that box before it began to hurt anyone. However, by the time he arrived, it had already been taken. This is what brings us back to the hospital, where Yuji confesses that it was him who found the cursed object, but since he didn't know what it was, he gave it to his friends in the occult research club. In doing so, he put their lives in serious danger because at the school they were currently in the process of unsealing the finger. According to Fushiguro, this is the worst thing that could happen, as he reveals that if the seal is broken, cursed spirits will be attracted to the area and will likely kill Yuji's friends. It's why in this scene the two of them rush to the school as fast as they can, and as Megumi enters the building, he's confronted by a bunch of creepy looking curses. Luckily for him, he's able to fight most of them off by using his curse technique, and I'm just going to take a second to quickly explain what this is. A curse technique is a unique ability that a sorcerer has to be born with, and when it comes to Fushiguro, his technique is called the 10 Shadows. The way it works is that there are 10 different hand gestures that he can make, each of which creates a shadow, and from those shadows he's able to summon up to 10 different Shikigami. In episode 1, he summons his divine dogs to tear apart the cursed spirits, but at this stage in the timeline, there are several other Shikigami that he hasn't managed to control. Anyway, on the outside of the school, Yuji was told to wait here by Fushiguro, but after remembering what his granddad said about helping others, he decides to try and do something. Using his insane strength, Itadori jumps all the way up to the 4th floor of the school and manages to save his friends from being eaten by a curse. Prior to this moment, Yuji had never seen a cursed spirit in his life, but in near-death situations and in places with godly amounts of cursed energy, non-sorcerers like him are sometimes able to see them. As Itadori then picks up the cursed object, Fushiguro reveals that the reason spirits are attracted to Sukuna's finger is because swallowing all that cursed energy would make them more powerful. Seconds later, the group then gets attacked by the toughest curse so far, and during the chaos, it beats up Megumi to the point where he can't really focus on his technique. At the same time, Yuji puts up a good fight, but as a non-sorcerer, it's impossible to kill spirits with his bare hands. That's why after it begins to overpower him, he decides that the best way to win is to swallow Sukuna's finger for himself. Based on what Fushiguro said, Yuji assumes that eating this will give him a ton of cursed energy, although what he doesn't know is that the finger is poisonous to humans. From the sidelines, Megumi watches on in horror, fully expecting Itadori to die from this, but out of nowhere, Sukuna's ancient soul takes over his body. The anime described this as a 1 in a million outcome that isn't supposed to happen, and within seconds, Sukuna effortlessly wipes out the cursed spirit. Surprisingly though, despite him being the strongest cursed object of all time, Yuji's soul somehow manages to regain control. This is good news since it means that for now, Sukuna can't go on a rampage, but from Megumi's perspective, it's still the worst day of his life. Thinking that Sukuna might still be in control, Fushiguro prepares to sacrifice himself by making the hand gesture to summon his most uncontrollable and overpowered Shikigami. Had he followed through with this, it's guaranteed that both himself and Yuji would have been killed, but fortunately for them, Gojo shows up before it happens. In the world of Jujutsu sorcerers, Satoru Gojo is by far the most talented human alive, and he also happens to be Megumi's teacher. His limitless curse technique gives him the power to manipulate space itself, and as a result he can teleport, erase matter, blow things away, make himself physically untouchable, and he never runs out of curse energy due to his special eyes. Now, after arriving at Fushiguro's location, Gojo takes an interest in Yuji and his unique ability to suppress Sukuna's soul. A rare talent like this could be incredibly valuable, but sadly, according to Jujutsu regulations, anyone possessed by a cursed object can't be allowed to survive. Regardless, Megumi urges his teacher to find a way to save Yuji's life, and so the next day Gojo brings Itadori to Jujutsu High. Hidden away in the mountains of Tokyo, Jujutsu High School is where generations of sorcerers have gone to master their techniques, including Gojo himself. The school is managed by a group of old men referred to as the higher-ups, and these guys are responsible for making the regulations. Unsurprisingly, once they found out about Yuji's situation, they ordered for him to be put to death, but Gojo made a convincing argument for delaying the execution. For the past 1,000 years, nothing has ever been strong enough to destroy Sukuna, but thanks to Itadori, they now have a real chance. Gojo's idea is that before Yuji gets executed, he should join Jujutsu High, where they can use him to track down all the remaining fingers. Once that's done, Yuji can then eat the rest of Sukuna's soul, so that when he gets executed, Sukuna will die at the same time. The higher-ups agreed to this proposal since it's their best chance to finally defeat the King of Curses, while from Yuji's point of view, even though he doesn't want to get executed, he was fine with going along with the plan for two reasons. The first reason is that by eliminating Sukuna, fewer people will die from curses, and so in this way, Itadori is helping others just like his granddad wanted. The second reason is that because he's the only person who can do this job, he feels like he'd regret it if he just sat by and did nothing. After hearing this, the principal of Jujutsu High enrolls Yuji as a first-year student alongside Fushiguro and one other person. Nobara Kugisaki is the feisty new student joining the class, and one thing you should know about her is that she's from the countryside and therefore isn't used to the kind of spirits that exist in Tokyo. This is why in episode 3, Gojo tries to test Nobara's skills by sending her and Yuji into a haunted building. Once they get inside, the two students then immediately split up, with Kugisaki being unimpressed at how Itadori only recently learnt about curses. Despite his inexperience though, he still exercises a spirit by himself by using this thing called a curse tool. As the name suggests, curse tools are weapons that have curse energy flowing through them, and they can be used by literally anyone to exercise a curse. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the building, Nobara is put in a very tricky situation when a low-level spirit takes a child hostage. Generally speaking, highly populated areas like Tokyo generate more curse energy than the countryside, and a knock-on effect of this is that the curses here are more intelligent. This curse was smart enough to recognize that it couldn't beat Kugisaki in a fight, and so instead it forces her to surrender by threatening the boy. In this moment, she accepts to herself that she's probably not gonna make it. However, Itadori saves the day as he bursts through the wall. This gave Nobara an opening to exorcise the cursed spirit, and in the aftermath, she opens up to Yuji about the reason she became a sorcerer. When she was younger, a family from Tokyo moved into her village, but were eventually forced to leave after receiving abuse from the locals. One of the girls in that family was Nobara's best friend at the time, and ever since the incident, Kugisaki has hated the countryside. Transferring to Jujutsu High was the only way for her to escape, and by arriving in Tokyo, she hopes that someday she'll bump into her old friend. Moving on, 2 weeks later, Nobara, Yuji, and Fushiguro are sent on a dangerous mission where unfortunately one of them ends up dead. To understand how this happened, we need to realize that when Sukuna came back to life, it led to a chain reaction in which his other 19 fingers were awakened. As a result, they now produce even more curse energy than usual, and on this mission, the group encounters a spirit that consumed one of these supercharged fingers. Cursed spirits of this level would usually be dealt with by someone like Gojo, but on this occasion, he was away on business and apparently no one else was free. That's why the first years were handed such a dangerous job, and after arriving at the scene, Nobara instantly gets abducted and thrown into a room full of cursed spirits. At the same time, Yuji and Fushiguro are attacked by the curse I just mentioned, and they realize pretty quickly that they're outmatched. Yuji in particular has his arm chopped off right at the beginning of the fight, while one of Fushiguro's divine dogs is torn to pieces. Feeling desperate, Itadori decides to ask Sukuna for help, but the King of Curses replies by threatening to murder everyone here if he gets control of the body. For that reason alone, Yuji begs his classmate to run as far away as possible so that he can unleash Sukuna without having to worry about people being killed. After briefly hesitating, Fushiguro agrees to this plan, and he leaves the area to go and find Kugisaki. His remaining divine dog has the ability to track down anyone with a familiar scent, and so in around 5 minutes, it leads them straight to Nobara. If they'd arrived any later, she would have definitely been eaten by this cursed spirit, but Fushiguro saves her life by using his frog shikigami. Following that, they completely escape the area, with the unconscious Kugisaki being put in the back of a car and driven straight to the hospital. I should point out that Megumi also had the option to go with her, but instead he chooses to stick around and wait for Yuji to come back. As he stands there waiting for a few minutes, Sukuna suddenly appears out of nowhere, having defeated the curse that was causing them so much trouble. Unlike the first episode though, this time around Yuji is struggling to regain control, giving Sukuna a rare opportunity to just do whatever he wants. To start things off, he literally rips out Itadori's heart, meaning that if they were to switch places again, Yuji would immediately die. The second thing he does is increase his strength by eating another finger, and this finger is the one that he took from the curse he just destroyed. Finally, the third thing, as you can see, is that he regenerated Yuji's severed arm thanks to the power of reverse curse technique. With all that said, Sukuna proceeds to give Megumi the worst beatdown of his life and even blows out one of his Shikigami in the process. As this one-sided fight continues, the King of Curses gets fascinated by Fushiguro's technique and claims that 10 Shadows had the potential to beat the cursed spirit from earlier. In spite of that, Megumi feels like this fight is one he can't win, and so once again he prepares to sacrifice himself by summoning his most dangerous Shikigami. Just like in episode 1, his plan was for both himself and Sukuna to die here, but before he goes through with it, we learn a little bit more about his backstory. In the recent past, Fushiguro's sister fell into a deep coma, and the incident helped him to understand that people get screwed over regardless of whether they're good or bad. Therefore, as a sorcerer, he tries to make sure that the good people suffer a tiny bit less, which is the reason he wanted to save Yuji. After hearing this, Itadori finally retakes control back from Sukuna, and collapses on the ground without the need for anyone to be sacrificed. The next day, when Gojo returns from his trip, he immediately suspects the higher-ups of organizing Yuji's death. While it's true that they did agree to pause his execution, there were still many higher-ups who wanted him gone, and sending first years on a mission like this was the perfect way to do it. In Gojo's mind, these elders are the scum of the Jujutsu world, and his dream was to raise a new generation of students that could fundamentally change their society. Yuji was supposed to be a part of that dream, which is why he's so disappointed, but what Gojo didn't realize was that Itadori's soul wasn't fully gone. Inside the mind of every sorcerer, there's a place known as an innate domain, and it's essentially a world that exists inside their head. When Yuji died, his soul entered Sukuna's innate domain, giving them one last chance to talk before he disappears. During this interaction, the King of Curses offers to heal Itadori's heart, but only if they agree to certain conditions. Condition number 1 is that at a time of Sukuna's choosing, he can take full control of Yuji's body for 60 seconds by saying the word extension. And condition number 2 is that Itadori will forget they made this deal. After negotiating, Sukuna agrees not to hurt anyone during those 60 seconds, and so the two of them form a binding vow. In Jujutsu, a binding vow is a contract that literally can't be broken, and it's implied the reason Sukuna wanted this deal is because he's plotting something to do with Fushiguro. Anyway, back in the real world, Yuji's body was seconds away from getting dissected by Shoko, who's the main doctor at Jujutsu High. However, as Gojo watches on, Itadori then resurrects in front of their eyes, creating a very interesting situation. As we know, the higher-ups all believe that Yuji is dead, so if they found out that he was alive, then they might just try to target him again. This is why Gojo and Shoko agree to keep his resurrection a secret, so that Itadori has time to train before anyone learns the truth. Later that same night, Yuji then gets taken to a random basement somewhere, where he begins learning how to control curse energy. Like I explained in the intro, curse energy comes from negative human emotions, but Jujutsu sorcerers are trained to use it regardless of their emotional state. In order for Yuji to learn this skill, he's forced to watch a ton of old movies, and the challenge here is to keep the negative energy flowing, irrespective of how the different movies make him feel. Now, while Itadori is busy with that, Gojo leaves to have a meeting with the principal, and on the journey there, he senses that he's being followed. After leaving the car, he's then ambushed by a special grade curse spirit, and I'm going to quickly break down what that means. In Jujutsu Kaisen, every curse is given a ranking, with grade 4 spirits being the weakest, and grade 1 spirits being the strongest. On rare occasions though, there are curse spirits so powerful that they rank even above grade 1, and it's these elites that are referred to as special grade. The name of this particular special grade is Jogo, and he's a super intelligent curse that's formed an alliance with other curses of the same level. Their ultimate goal is for curse spirits to become the dominant lifeforms on the planet, and to accomplish that mission, they need to get rid of the strongest sorcerer. What follows this is Jogo repeatedly trying and failing to land a hit, while Gojo crushes him in the most disrespectful way imaginable. During the middle of the fight, he even teleports away to grab Yuji, because he figured this would be a good chance to teach a student about domain expansions. A domain expansion is when someone uses massive amounts of curse energy to bring their innate domain into the real world. The benefit is that your opponents will be trapped inside the barrier, and any attack you make against them is guaranteed to hit the target. For that reason, expanding his domain was Jogo's best chance of victory, but what he wasn't prepared for was Gojo doing the exact same thing. When two domains are activated in the same space, the more polished domain will nearly always override the other one, and in this case, Jogo loses instantly. Usually this would be the part where he gets exercised as well, but Gojo decides to temporarily spare his life so that he can find out why the curse ambushed him in the first place. To be specific, Gojo wants to know who the special grade is working with, and I guess now is a good time to explain the other members of Jogo's group. To start with, we have Hanami, who's an intelligent cursed spirit created from the fear that people have of the forest. Because of why he was born, his technique lets him generate flowers and other natural things that you'd expect to find in a forest environment. Next up, we have Dagon, who was created from the fear that people have of the ocean, hence why his domain expansion is this sunny beach. After him is Mahito, who's the leader of the group, and Mahito is a spirit born from the hatred that humans have towards each other. As a consequence, Mahito has a deep understanding of how people think, and his technique enables him to transform their soul in terrifying ways. Finally, the last member of this team is Suguru Geto, who's a human sorcerer and Gojo's former best friend. For now though, all you have to know is that everyone in the Jujutsu world thinks that Geto is dead, and they have no idea that he's secretly working with these cursed spirits. Switching back to Jogo's battle with Gojo, you'll notice that in the background, two of his allies have been watching him fight. Although neither of them wanted to get involved, Hanami decides that he can't just stand back and watch his fellow curse be destroyed. Therefore, he creates a big distraction using his technique, which gives Hanami a small opening to swoop in and save Jogo's life. This was a super risky move since there was always a chance that Gojo would have exercised them both, but luckily in this situation they do manage to escape. Following that encounter, the Special Grades realize that they don't have what it takes to kill the strongest sorcerer, which to be fair is something Geto tried to tell them from the beginning. Instead, his idea to deal with Gojo is to seal his former best friend inside the prison realm, which is a cursed object that traps its target in another dimension. For this scheme to work though, there are certain preparations that Geto has to make, which is why he says that they should wait a few months until October the 31st. Flashing forward to September, by this point Yuji has been secretly training for a while, and he's learnt the basics of using curse energy. To test out his new skills, Gojo sends him on a mission with Nanami, who's a grade 1 sorcerer and one of the few people that Gojo can trust. Together, their job is to investigate the murder of 3 high school students who were gruesomely disfigured in a local cinema. The way they were killed means that a cursed spirit is likely responsible, and after looking into it, Nanami discovers 2 things. Number 1, at the time of the killings there was another boy in the cinema called Junpei who could possibly be a witness. Number 2, whoever the murderer is left behind obvious clues, almost like they want to be found. The next day, these clues bring Nanami to a location in the sewer, where he comes face to face with Mahito. Despite being the leader of his group, Mahito is a relatively young curse who spends his days experimenting on humans with his technique. Luring Nanami to the sewers was just another one of those experiments, as he wanted to transform the soul of a Jujutsu sorcerer. What comes after this is one of the best fights in season 1 that ends in a draw, as Mahito is crushed under a pile of rubble, while Nanami escapes with a non-life-threatening injury. At the exact same time, Yuji approaches Junpei to ask him a few questions, and it turns out the boy is able to see curses. Back in the cinema, he witnessed Mahito murdering his classmates, but rather than being scared, he wanted to know if he could learn the same power. In case you want to know why he's like this, Junpei is a character who was severely bullied at school, and the cinema victims were 3 of the bullies who made his life hell. Therefore, he didn't really care that they died, and after this incident, Mahito realized that Junpei could be useful to him. Remember, although the goal of Mahito's group is for curses to overthrow humanity, sealing Gojo was only one part of their plan. The second part is for Sukuna to join their side, and to make this happen, what they need is a human who can get close to Yuji. This is where Junpei comes in, because in episode 11, Mahito literally tells him to make friends with anyone wearing the Jujutsu High uniform. When Junpei then meets Itadori, this is exactly what happens, as they form a genuine connection over their love of movies. In fact, they get along so well that Yuji gets invited round to his house for dinner, while off in the distance, Geto is secretly observing the whole thing. Later that evening, it's implied that he talks to Mahito about what he saw, as they come up with a solid strategy to get Sukuna on their team. Without going into all the details, their plan was to engineer a situation in which Yuji would be forced to give permanent control of his body to the King of Curses. Mahito believed that by doing this favor for Sukuna, he'd be more likely to assist the group in their mission to become the dominant lifeforms. The very next day, this plan is then set into motion as Junpei gets brutally disfigured right in front of Yuji's eyes. Naturally, Itadori doesn't have any powers to change his friend back to normal, and so he begs Sukuna for help and offers up his entire body in exchange for saving Junpei. Of course, this outcome is exactly what Mahito was hoping would happen, but in a shocking turn of events, the King of Curses chooses not to accept the deal. Part of the reason he says no is that he just enjoys seeing Yuji suffer, but another reason is that they already made a deal that will let him take over whenever he needs to. On top of that, it's unclear whether reverse curse technique can cure someone whose soul has been manipulated, and so yeah, just overall it wasn't the best deal for Sukuna. As a result, Junpei drops dead right there and then, causing Yuji to lose his mind as he tries to get revenge against Mahito. Throughout his fight with the special grade, we learn that because Itadori has two souls inside him, it makes him naturally resistant to Mahito's technique. What this means is that his soul can't be destroyed in the same way as other people, and he can physically damage the curse in a way that Nanami wasn't able to. Speaking of Nanami, he then shows up at the location, and the two sorcerers work together to crush the special grade to the point where he's about to be exorcised. Unfortunately though, this near-death experience causes Mahito to evolve as he triggers his domain expansion for the first time ever. The main benefit of this barrier is that Mahito can destroy the soul of anyone trapped inside, and in this case he decides to only trap Nanami, since Yuji having two souls is a bit of a problem. Being realistic, this was actually the smartest thing Mahito could have done, but what he wasn't prepared for was that Itadori would be crazy enough to break into his domain. Breaking into this barrier from the outside is a thing that no sane person would ever think about, but by Yuji doing this, it meant that Mahito's domain accidentally made contact with Sukuna's soul. The King of Curses is someone with huge amounts of pride, and having his soul touched in this way is something that he didn't really appreciate. Also, he genuinely doesn't care about anyone else except himself and Megami, and so for that reason, Sukuna blows up Mahito's domain. The fight is then basically over after that, as the special grade runs away into the sewers, while the sorcerers try and fail to chase after him. Anyway, moving back to Jujutsu High, for the past month, Megami and Kugisaki had been training for the Goodwill event. Unlike 2017, Yuta wouldn't be there since he was currently overseas on a mission with Miguel. This particular mission was organized by Gojo himself, who had a very specific reason why he wanted these two to work together. Because Gojo is Gojo, Miguel couldn't really say no, but despite that he still gets on well with Yuta, despite everything that happened to Geto. Therefore, with Yuta being completely out of the picture, and with the Tokyo 3rd years being suspended, Megami and Kugisaki were invited to fill those spots. Besides these two, there were a ton of interesting characters in the Goodwill event, and for the purpose of this video, I'm going to explain the 5 who are most relevant to the plot. First off, in the Tokyo school we have Maki Zenin, who is now a 2nd year student. In the world of Jujutsu, the Zenin family are one of the most influential clans, alongside the Gojo clan and the Kamo clan. However, pretty much everyone in the family treats Maki like a failure, since she was born with a condition known as Heavenly Restriction. Heavenly Restriction is when a sorcerer is born with some kind of defect in exchange for being extremely talented in some other way. In Maki's case, she was born with just a tiny amount of curse energy, but in exchange, she has above average strength on a similar level to Yuji. Panda is another 2nd year student at Tokyo, and he's a rare type of creature referred to as a cursed corpse. To put it simply, a cursed corpse is an inanimate object that is brought to life when someone puts cursed energy inside it. Most of the time, these corpses are only able to function as long as they keep receiving cursed energy, but Panda is different from this since he's able to generate his own cursed energy like a regular human. As a brief side note, Panda was the creation of Principal Yaga, who's the guy that runs Tokyo Jujutsu High. Switching over to the Kyoto school, we have Mai Zenin, who's the twin sister of Maki, and someone who never wanted to be a sorcerer. It was only when Maki joined Jujutsu High that Mai was pressured to go down a similar path, and as you can imagine, they don't really get along. One of Mai's classmates at Kyoto is a robot called Mekamaru, but in reality, the robot is controlled by a real person. Just like Maki, this guy was born with Heavenly Restriction, meaning that in exchange for being heavily disabled, he has massive amounts of curse energy and a long-range technique that lets him control puppets. Finally, the last person I want to mention for now is Todo, who is by far the strongest student at Kyoto, and he's an interesting guy who loves to fight, hates boring people, doesn't listen to instructions, is obsessed with a pop star, and thinks of himself as extremely intelligent. On the day of the Goodwill event, he and his classmates travel to Tokyo to take part in a team battle against Fushiguro's group. However, just before it gets underway, Gojo turns up with a surprise for everyone as he dramatically reveals that Yuji is still alive. Given that it's been about 2 months since he died, Megumi and Kugisaki had finished grieving him a long time ago, and so their initial reaction wasn't as excited as he was expecting. Regardless, they were both happy to have him back, although there's one person who didn't exactly feel the same way. Principal Gakuganji is the headmaster of the Kyoto school and is one of the old higher-ups that wanted Yuji to be executed. After finding out that Sukuna's vessel isn't dead, Gakuganji holds an emergency meeting with his students where he orders them to kill Itadori for a second time. In particular, he wants the killing to take place during the Goodwill event in a way that makes it look like an accident. Meanwhile, as if that wasn't enough drama, in a separate area of the school, Mahito had managed to sneak in. To understand why, we need to flash back to the moment when Sukuna casually destroyed his domain expansion. It was thanks to this humiliation that Mahito realized the King of Curses is way stronger than he ever imagined. In fact, Sukuna's strength was so overwhelming that the cursed spirits don't even want him to join their team anymore. Instead, all they want is to bring him back to life, as they believe that he'll begin a new era of curses all by himself. This is where Jujutsu High comes in, because hidden somewhere inside the school are 6 of Sukuna's fingers. So far in the series, Yuji has ever only consumed 1 finger at a time, which has enabled him to retain some level of control. However, things would be different if he was forced to eat 6 or more in one go. That's why Geto suggested that they steal them from Jujutsu High, so that on October the 31st, they'll be able to unleash Sukuna and seal Gojo on the same day. Now, one thing I should probably mention before we continue is that inside the school there's a 1,000-year-old sorcerer who protects the cursed objects. The name of this sorcerer is Tengen, and for now, all you need to know about this character is that she is the only one who knows where Sukuna's fingers are stored. Normally it would be impossible for anyone else to find them, but luckily Geto had thought of a way around this. During the Junpei storyline, Geto actually had a finger of his own, and he strategically planted it somewhere where he knew Jujutsu High would find it. As expected, the school then took the cursed object and placed it with the others, but what they didn't know is that it had a tracker with Mahito's cursed energy inside it. This meant that Mahito would easily be able to find the secret room, and while he's doing that, Hanami and a couple of assassins will create a big distraction. Back to the Goodwill event, by this point in the team battle, Kugisaki was defeated by Mai was then defeated by Maki, Mekamaru was defeated by Panda, and Yuji and Todo somehow became best friends. Unlike the rest of his school, Todo didn't have any desire to kill Itadori, and as the two of them started fighting, he realized that they liked the same type of girl. As a result, he protected his new best friend from being executed, and begins teaching Yuji a lesson about how to harness cursed energy more efficiently. While that craziness was going on, Megumi was involved in a fight of his own against a student who has a lot of political importance. Noritoshi Kamo is a 3rd-year student at Kyoto High, and next in line to be leader of the Kamo clan. I mentioned earlier that the Kamo clan is equal to the Gojo clan and the Zenin clan, meaning Noritoshi himself is a future higher up of the Jujutsu world. Despite that, he has a super complicated family situation, which is why he feels like he can relate to Fushiguro. 11 years ago, Fushiguro's dad disappeared without a trace, and Gojo stepped in to essentially become his new legal guardian. What makes this complicated is that Megumi's father was from the Zenin clan, meaning that Fushiguro is a sorcerer with Zenin blood, but who's more closely associated with the Gojos. Anyway, during his fight with Noritoshi, things get interrupted when Hanami shows up. The special grade attacks them so badly that Megumi thinks about sacrificing himself for the 3rd time, but he chooses not to when some other Tokyo students come to help. Gradually, the battle keeps evolving until Yuji and Todo are the main ones fighting Hanami, and they're able to deal a good amount of damage. Todo's curse technique lets him switch places with anything that has a certain amount of curse energy, and so he constantly confuses the special grade by changing positions. At the same time, Yuji is now a lot stronger thanks to his new best friend, and he punches Hanami with an attack known as Black Flash. Together, Yuji and Todo force Hanami into a desperate situation where he felt like his best option to survive was to activate his domain expansion. However, before he gets the chance to activate it, Satoru Gojo finally makes an appearance. Up until this moment, he'd been unable to join the fight because the villains had made a barrier out of cursed energy that specifically prevented him from coming in. Barriers like this are referred to as curtains, and the rules of a curtain will vary depending on who created it. In this case, the only rule of this barrier was that Gojo wasn't allowed to enter, but everyone else was free to come in or out whenever they wanted. This was a genius move because it meant that Satoru focused all his energy on getting inside, rather than paying attention to the fact that the school was getting robbed. Regardless, he kind of saves the day by crippling one of the assassins and blowing a huge chunk out of the forest that was supposed to kill Hanami. Honestly, the damage here was so extensive that nobody could really tell whether the spirit was dead or alive, but later that day we find out that the special grade did barely manage to escape. Following this incident, the Goodwill event is on the verge of being cancelled, but Todo manages to persuade the other students to continue. That's why the next day, the two schools have a baseball match to determine the winner, with Yuji helping Tokyo in a big way to come out on top. Although the higher-ups do still want him dead, Principal Yaga convinces Principal Gakuganji to hold off for now, as Itadori proved that he has the potential to save lives in the future. Later that week, the first years are sent on a brand new mission where they investigate the mysterious deaths of 4 people. The 4 victims all used to be classmates over 20 years ago, and coincidentally, the school they went to is where Megumi used to go before Jujutsu High. As part of the investigation, Fushiguro pays his old school a visit, where a member of staff and a couple other students give us some relevant information. Near the local area, there's a famous haunted place called Yasuhachi Bridge, and 20 years ago, 4 students were found unconscious in this exact spot. When the kids woke up, they had no recollection of what happened, but now, in the present day, all 4 were recently murdered by a cursed spirit. The main question for Jujutsu High is whether the cursed spirit will target anyone else next, and this is where Fujinuma comes in. Fujinuma is one of Megumi's old classmates, and she reveals that during her childhood she visited Yasuhachi Bridge along with Fushiguro's sister. What this means is that based on all the evidence so far, the curse that killed those 4 men will likely go after Fujinuma and Sumiki within the next 1 or 2 weeks. Therefore, in order to save their lives, it's important that this spirit is exorcised as soon as humanly possible, which is why the first years arrive at the bridge. Pretty soon, the 3 of them then walk into a barrier made of cursed energy, and once inside, they get confronted by a creature they've never faced before. For a bit of context here, 150 years ago there was an evil sorcerer called Noritoshi Kamo, who was the ancestor of the Noritoshi in the present day. The old Noritoshi was infamous for his disgusting experiments, one of which was to create a life form that was both half human and half cursed spirit. In total, he made 9 of these hybrids, and the official name for them is the Cursed Womb Death Paintings. For decades, all 9 death paintings were hidden inside Jujutsu High in the same storeroom as Sukuna's fingers. When Mahito robbed the school, he took 3 of the death paintings with him, and with Geto's help, Chozo, Eizo, and Kijisu were brought back to life in new bodies. Despite them being hybrids, the 3 brothers feel no loyalty towards humans or cursed spirits, as the only thing they care about is protecting each other. For that reason, they do agree to help Mahito, because the world he's trying to create is one where the death paintings might be able to live in peace. Following that, Eizo and Kijisu were set on a mission to find one of Sukuna's missing fingers, which just so happens to be under Yasuhachi Bridge. This is what leads to a fight between the death paintings and Yujisaki, while Megumi is left to fight against the curse that they came here to kill. A long time ago, this cursed spirit had absorbed one of Sukuna's fingers, but for a while nothing happened because the fingers weren't awakened. However, once Sukuna was reincarnated a few months ago, all the fingers woke up and the curse of Yasuhachi Bridge then became active. This means that the recent death of those 4 adults and the upcoming death of Sumiki, it can all be traced back to Yuji's decision to eat the cursed object. Anyway, it goes without saying that the cursed spirit of Yasuhachi Bridge was incredibly strong, even more so than the one they faced earlier in the series. Within seconds, it almost instantly knocks Fushiguro unconscious, and puts him in a situation where he doesn't have much hope of survival. That's why, for the 4th time this season, he gets ready to sacrifice himself by summoning a Shikigami that he knows will kill them both. Before he fully summons it though, he remembers something that was said to him by 2 of the strongest sorcerers of all time. As we know, Sukuna outright stated that Megumi has the potential to beat curses like this, while Gojo encouraged his student to abandon this sacrificial mentality that keeps holding him back. Therefore, instead of just sacrificing himself, Fushiguro chooses to go all out as he attempts to manifest his domain in the real world. Only sorcerers of the highest level can do this, and while Megumi isn't on that level yet, he's able to create an incomplete domain expansion. Within this shadowy domain, he can create clones of himself and clones of his Shikigami, which are used to overwhelm the special grade spirit. He then finishes it off by activating his divine dog, which brutally rips out Sukuna's finger from inside the spirit's chest. In the end, the result of this fight is that Sumiki and Fujinuma are no longer going to die from the curse of the bridge, but unfortunately his sister is still in a coma due to a completely separate curse that she also has. Meanwhile, Yuji and Kugisaki kill the two death paintings, and this was impressive since Eizo and his brother were technically special grade curses. After the incident, Itadori feels slightly guilty for what happened, given that they ended the lives of two actual human beings who clearly cared about each other a lot. Although the eldest sibling Chozo wasn't there, his curse technique allowed him to sense that his siblings were killed. Geto then reveals to him that it was Yuji who killed them, and this scene is super important for two reasons. Number one, Geto receiving this intel so quickly proves beyond any doubt that there's someone at Jujutsu High who's feeding him information. Number two, the death of Chozo's brothers gave him a serious motivation to kill Yuji, because if you need to know one thing about Chozo, is that everything he does it for his siblings. A few days later, words begin to spread about how the first years each defeated a special grade, and this leads to a few different consequences. For a start, Todo makes an official recommendation that they be promoted to grade 1 sorcerers, and his recommendation is supported by one of Gojo's friends, who may or may not have been paid by Gojo to do this. Another thing is that the second years begin training even harder than before, since Maki is determined not to fall behind her cousin Fushiguro and the other two first year students. On top of that, although the recent deaths were kind of Itadori's fault, Megumi and Nobara agree not to tell him since they think that he might not be able to deal with the guilt. That being said, an interesting plot twist is that Yuji does actually know it was his fault, but he chooses not to say anything because he doesn't want Fushiguro to feel regret for saving his life. Season 1 then ends with the first years going shopping before Gojo unexpectedly calls them for what he describes as a top secret mission. The purpose of this mission was to figure out exactly who at Jujutsu High was the one feeding information to Mahito's group. After looking into it, the prime suspect was identified as Mekamaru, who was a student that we first met during the Goodwill event. Back then, Mekamaru, whose real name is Kokichi Muta, revealed that he lived in constant pain, couldn't use his legs, and had skin so sensitive that it would sting if light touched it. For that reason, his real body never leaves his secret base, however, his technique allows him to communicate through these puppets. The mission for Megumi's class was to ask the real Kokichi some questions, but when they arrived, it was clear he'd sent them to a fake location. By itself, this showed he had something to hide, and at Mekamaru's actual base, he received a visit from Geto and Mahito. It turns out that months earlier, these three had made a binding vow, which is an unbreakable contract between sorcerers. The deal was that Kokichi would gather intel for them using his puppets, explaining how the curses knew where and when to find Gojo in Season 1. In exchange, Mahito agreed to fully heal Mekamaru, which is something only he can do. Remember, because Kokichi was born with a heavenly restriction, it's not like you can fix him with reverse curse technique, otherwise the school could have done it a long time ago. Mahito is different because his technique lets him reshape the soul, and with a single touch, he turned Mekamaru into peak physical condition. Now, you might be wondering, why did they try to kill each other right after this? And the answer comes down to Kokichi himself. Unlike the other humans who work with Mahito, Kokichi was never evil. In fact, he openly said that he thinks of Mahito as scum. To him, all that mattered was getting healthy so he could finally meet his friends, especially Miwa, meaning the binding vow was purely business. As soon as Mahito healed him, it meant the vow was now complete, and from this moment, both sides were free to act how they wanted. In an ideal world, this is when Mekamaru would have escaped to warn Gojo about the villain's plans, but Geto prevented that by surrounding the whole area in a curtain. Quick reminder, a curtain is a barrier made from cursed energy, which can be used to stop people from coming in and also to stop people from escaping. Geto's barrier left Kokichi with no choice but to stay and fight, and to make things worse, he couldn't call for help since curtains do interfere with signals. Now, by himself, the odds of Mekamaru beating a special grade curse and special grade sorcerer were low. In fact, Geto felt so unthreatened that he didn't even bother to fight. Instead, he just let Mahito have some fun, and to be fair, Kokichi's strategies did at least make things interesting. However, one thing we should never forget is that at any time, Geto could have summoned many more special grade curses, and it was his decision to hold back and do nothing that made it seem like Kokichi had a chance. In reality, he was never going to escape, and after Mahito killed him, he confirmed that the battle looked more dangerous than it was. With Mekamaru being dead, there was now no one left who could spoil their plans, and I'm going to take a quick second to explain what their plan is. In Season 1, we learned that the goal of Mahito's group is for curses to replace humans as the dominant life forms on the planet. To make that happen, they first had to get rid of Satoru Gojo, because as long as he's around, it's impossible for curses to take over. Originally, Jogo didn't believe this, which is why he personally tried to kill Gojo himself, but after this beatdown, they realized he was invincible. That's why, instead of trying to kill Satoru, Geto proposed that they seal him away. To be specific, in Geto's possession was an object known as the Prison Realm that can seal anyone inside as long as you satisfy two conditions that we'll discuss later. For now, all we need to know is that to make the Prison Realm work, the curses had to create a situation where Gojo was isolated, distracted, and couldn't use his full power. This is what brings us to Shibuya on the night of October 31st, when thousands of people were in the area to celebrate Halloween. At exactly 7 PM, Mahito's group put up a massive curtain that trapped these civilians inside, and a side effect of the barrier was that phone signals were also blocked. Now, at first, people didn't really notice anything was wrong, since the barrier was invisible to most non-sorcerers. As time went on though, more and more civilians realized they couldn't leave, and without signal there wasn't a way to call for help. Then, according to this random guy, people were told that their only way to escape was to bring Satoru Gojo to Shibuya. Obviously, no one here knows who Gojo is, but in order to escape, they went up to the edge of the curtain and started calling his name. When Jujutsu High heard about this, the higher-ups told Satoru to fix the problem himself, and at 8:31 PM he finally arrived at the scene. The nature of this curtain meant that even though civilians were trapped, sorcerers could freely enter and leave as many times as they wanted. Speaking of sorcerers, outside the barrier were 4 separate teams sent by Jujutsu HQ, whose mission for now was to do nothing. Moving on, 7 minutes after arriving, Gojo noticed that the villains had created a new curtain inside of Shibuya's train station. Just like the curtain above ground, the new barrier also trapped non-sorcerers. In particular, it trapped them around the train platform. This meant that if Satoru was to go down there, he'd be totally surrounded by people from all sides, and therefore couldn't use red, blue, or hollow purple. On top of that, he also couldn't use a domain expansion, since anyone in his domain would be finished, and anyone outside his domain would get crushed in between his barrier and the barrier that surrounds the train platform. In other words, this new curtain was clearly a trap to limit Gojo's power, and even though he knew this, he still went down there to protect the civilians. At 8:40 PM, he was then confronted by Jogo, Hanami, and Chozo, who began wiping out non-sorcerers right in front of him. The purpose of them doing this was to create a big distraction, as they wanted all of Satoru's focus to be on saving lives and fighting curses. As long as they could keep that up for at least 20 minutes, then Geto promised them he'd handle everything else. Unfortunately, over half an hour later, Geto still hadn't shown up, and by this point, Gojo had crushed Hanami to death. At the same time, Jogo was incredibly stressed out, and he only managed to survive by running away and hiding in the crowd. The reason Geto hadn't arrived yet is that he felt like Satoru was still too relaxed, but this began to change when a train pulled up to the platform. On this train was Mahito and 1,000 transfigured humans who were all normal people that were turned into monsters by his technique. In the chaos that followed, dozens of non-sorcerers were slaughtered by the transfigured humans, putting Gojo in a tricky situation. On one hand, he could activate his domain expansion, which would allow him to easily kill Mahito, Jogo, and all of the transfigured humans. However, the downside is that it'd sacrifice all of the civilians around him, which is something Gojo wasn't prepared to do. This is why Satoru was forced to get creative, and for the first time ever, he expanded his domain for only 0.2 seconds. As we know, usually Infinite Void floods the brain with unlimited information, but since the domain was so quick, the info sent to people's brains was only around 6 months worth. This was enough to paralyze every human without giving them permanent damage, but Gojo believed that the curses might wake up at any time. Therefore, rather than getting into a fight with them, he decided to put all of his efforts into destroying the transfigured humans. For 5 minutes straight, Gojo then went on a rampage as he killed roughly 3 or 4 transfigured humans per second. Understandably, after doing all of that, I don't think anyone could say he was relaxed, making this the perfect time for Geto to use the Prison Realm. I mentioned earlier that this object has 2 conditions to work, which are 1, the target has to be within 4 meters of the prison realm, and 2, the target has to stay there for a minute, or to put it another way, 60 seconds worth of information has to flow into the target's brain. That's why, immediately after throwing the prison realm near Gojo, Geto then finally made his appearance. Remember, the last time these two saw each other was nearly a year earlier when Satoru killed him during the events of the JJK movie. That's why to see Geto now just standing here was a massive shock, and more than that, it caused years worth of memories to flow through Gojo's mind. This amount of memories easily surpassed the 1-minute rule for the prison realm, and just like that, Satoru was trapped by this special grade object. Interestingly though, just before he was sealed, we learned some crucial information about how Geto is still around. It turns out that after Gojo had killed his best friend, he didn't give the body to Shoko, who's the doctor at Jujutsu High. Back in 2006, Shoko was their classmate at the school, so it's possible out of compassion for her he didn't want her to deal with Suguru's corpse. That's just one theory. I mean, another theory is that he didn't want Geto to be dissected, but the point is that Geto's body was never cremated. This gave an opening for someone else to steal the body, and what's crazy is that we already knew about the person who did it. If you saw my video explaining the first season, then you'll remember a sorcerer called Noritoshi Kamo, who was the mad scientist that created the half-human, half-curse hybrids. One of this scientist's curse techniques was the ability to take over another person's body by literally switching brains. By switching places with Geto, Noritoshi gained the ability to use curse spirit manipulation, which was essential for his own secret plans. Now, while all of this was going on, one of the 4 sorcerer teams was already on their way to Gojo's location. This team consisted of the grade 1 sorcerer Mei, her younger brother Wiwi, and also Yuji was third wheeling. Unlike the other teams who were told to do nothing, Mei's team was already busy dealing with curses and transfigured humans at a place called Meiji Shrine Station. Meiji Shrine Station is just one stop away from Shibuya, and it's where Mahito was before he hopped on the train full of transfigured humans. Since then, Mei's team had been running in that same direction, but when Gojo was sealed, Yuji was suddenly contacted by Mekamaru. By combining technology with Jujutsu, Kokichi wrote a program before his death that would only activate if Gojo was sealed. The end result was these AI-like robots that contained his memories, and for a limited time they were able to talk. After convincing Mei's team that he was actually on their side, Mekamaru revealed that there was now a new curtain surrounding Shibuya Station. Importantly, this new barrier stopped all sorcerers from getting in, meaning it was impossible for Mei's team to reach Gojo. For that reason, Yuji headed back up to the surface, as his mission was to destroy this new curtain while also gathering allies. Meanwhile, inside of Shibuya Station, the villains had a polite disagreement over what they should do next. From Jogo's point of view, to create a world where curses are on top, it was necessary to bring Sukuna back to life. The general idea was that Sukuna is so evil and so chaotic that if he took control of Yuji, it could be the end of modern civilization. By contrast, Mahito and Chozo both wanted to kill Yuji for their own personal reasons. In Mahito's case, he believed that with or without Sukuna, the curses are still strong enough to overthrow humanity. Therefore, it doesn't really matter if Itadori lives or dies, and following their previous encounter, Mahito just really wanted to kill him. Meanwhile, in Chozo's case, he wanted to kill Yuji to avenge his brothers, who were finished off last season by Gojo's students. After failing to agree, the curses each ran off to find Itadori themselves, and whoever found him first would get to decide his fate. Speaking of Yuji, by now he teamed up with Ino, who's a grade 2 sorcerer, and Megumi to take down the curtain that blocks sorcerers. For context, the source of this curtain was these 3 talismans, which were being protected by Granny Ogami and Jiro Awasaka. Back in the 80s, these two used Jujutsu to enjoy successful careers as criminals, but everything went downhill for them after Gojo was born. As the strongest sorcerer by far, his existence forced people like this to lie low, as they knew they could never stand up to him. That's why they partnered with Geto, aka Noritoshi Kamo, cause by sealing Gojo away, it'd allow them to freely act as criminals once again. That said, thanks to Megumi's high battle IQ, he and Yuji were able to beat Jiro despite his tricky curse technique. In the process, the final talismans were now destroyed, and at 10:04 PM, the curtain blocking sorcerers came down. Now, this should have been a great moment, but unfortunately, it got overshadowed by Ino almost dying. To cut a long story short, Granny Ogami's technique is one that gives her or someone else the option to shapeshift into another person. Crucially though, that other person has to be dead, and in this case, Ogami transformed her grandson into Toji Zenin. This gave her grandson all of Toji's physical attributes, and within seconds he pulverized Ino and threw him off a building. With Ino being down, that forced the sorcerers to kind of rethink their next move, with Megumi leaving to get Ino some help, while Yuji headed to Shibuya Station alone. What's unlucky is the second he arrived, Chozo was right there, instantly beginning their fight to the death. When it comes to Chozo, his curse technique is blood manipulation, which you might have noticed is the exact same as Noritoshi from the Kyoto school. However, the main difference between them is that because Chozo is half human and half cursed spirit, he doesn't run out of blood. As long as there's cursed energy in his system, he can generate blood forever, meaning his attacks can be more adventurous than Noritoshi. On top of that, he's just a more naturally talented sorcerer, and throughout his fight with Itadori, he quickly adapted and countered Yuji's tactics. After knocking him unconscious, Chozo had the chance to then kill Itadori, but at the last moment he felt something. A side effect of his technique is that he can immediately sense when his brothers have died, and with Yuji on death's door, Chozo had that exact same sensation. By default, this means that somehow, someway, Itadori is his younger brother, but in this moment he didn't know how to make sense of that. That's why he just kinda ran away screaming, and as he left the area, Yuji's body was found by Mimiko and Nanako. These are the twin sorcerers who were raised by Geto, but before we get into why they're here, let's switch over to Nanami. Right now, his intention was to reach the platform where Gojo was sealed, because thanks to Mekamaru, they knew the prison realm was still there. Tagging along with Nanami was Maki and Naobito Zenin, who's a grade 1 sorcerer and the current head of the Zenin clan. As head of the family, he was the one who made the deal to buy Megami, so as you can imagine, he's not the biggest fan of Gojo. Despite that, he was still with them as they went to go save him, but on the way there, the group encountered a special grade curse. Out of the 4 cursed spirits in Mahito's group, Dagon was easily the weakest, but in this scene it was his hatred of humans and his anger at Hanami's death that helped him to evolve into his true form. Like this, he was strong enough to take them on by himself, but the sorcerers worked hard to prevent him opening his domain. In particular, Naobito's projection sorcery caused a lot of trouble, and it's worth taking a second to explain how this works. When activated, Naobito has to think of 24 unique movements in his mind, and then his technique makes it all happen within a single second. Likewise, when he touches an opponent, they also have to think of 24 unique movements, and if those movements aren't performed, the victim gets trapped inside a frame for 1 second instead. Anyway, after a big struggle, Dagon does eventually open his domain. However, things kind of go off script when Megami shows up to open his. As we know, when 2 domains are open at the same time, they fight for control until the strongest domain takes over. In this situation, it's clear that Dagon's domain was more refined, but Megami wasn't actually trying to win. Instead, he only opened his domain to create this hole at the edge of Dagon's barrier, giving the sorcerers a way to escape. The problem though is that he couldn't maintain the hole for very long, and before they could leave, Toji suddenly entered. For context, when Granny Ogami used her technique, her grandson was only meant to inherit Toji's appearance and physical strength. This was supposed to continue until her grandson had no cursed energy left, but the issue is that Toji's body never had any to begin with. Consequently, the normal rules of her technique didn't apply, leading to a few glitches. The first glitch was that her grandson's soul disappeared, as it got overwritten by the pure instincts of Toji's body. Essentially, this meant he became a mindless killing machine that simply wanted to fight the strongest person around. The second glitch is that there was no time limit due to there being no cursed energy involved, and in theory he could keep fighting forever, at least until someone beats him. With that explained, the ghost of Toji entered Dagon's domain, and with a small assist from Naobito, he casually finished off this special grade curse. Following that, his attention immediately turned to Megami, not because it's his son, but because Fushiguro was the next strongest person to fight. By this point, Nanami and Naobito were heavily injured, and so they got ignored as Toji brought Megami outside the station. At the same time, Jogo showed up right after they left, and as revenge for what happened to Dagon, he cooked Maki and both of the grade 1 sorcerers alive. In fact, in this scene, it looked like he planned to burn Naobito for a second time, but before that could happen, he felt Sukuna's presence. To be specific, he actually sent Sukuna's finger, and that's because Mimiko and Nanako had just fed one to Yuji. Their motivation in doing this was to ask Sukuna for a favor, as they needed someone on his level to kill the fake Geto. Him being dead would allow them to get their master's body back, since they never really agreed with it being used in this way. Now, within seconds of feeding Yuji, Jogo then appeared, and he came armed with 10 of Sukuna's fingers. Many of these fingers were the ones they stole from Jujutsu High, and by giving all of them to Yuji at once, the King of Curses was able to gain temporary control. One of the first things he did was to slice up Mimiko and Nanako for trying to negotiate, but with Jogo he had a lot more patience. This is because Jogo didn't ask him to do anything, rather he simply suggested that Sukuna could take permanent control of Yuji by making a binding vow. Crucially, what Jogo wasn't aware of is that last season these two already made a binding vow that would allow Sukuna to take over when he felt the time was right. For that reason, he wasn't interested in Jogo's proposal, but to show his appreciation for the fingers, he offered the cursed spirit a deal. The agreement was that if Jogo could land a single hit on Sukuna, then he'd help them massacre every human in Shibuya, except for one. What followed this was equal to a natural disaster, as Jogo literally melted and tore apart the city trying to land a hit. During this carnage, he used every move at his disposal except his domain, cause after losing to Gojo last time, he basically had PTSD. That said, nothing he did this time was enough to hit Sukuna, and when the King of Curses whipped out his own flames, that was pretty much game over. This fire is an aspect of Sukuna's technique not explained in Season 2, but based on what he said, we know it's a power he's obviously used in the past that he assumed was well known by sorcerers. After using his flames to burn Jogo to a crisp, Sukuna then sensed there was something wrong with Megumi. To understand why, let's flash back to his fight with Toji as he hunted his only child across Shibuya. It's worth pointing out that because Toji was such an absent father when he was alive, Megumi didn't recognize him, and likewise, this glitched out version of Toji also didn't recognize his son. However, in the end, after nearly killing Megumi several times, Toji's ghost finally made the connection, and he was actually happy to find out that his son didn't join the Zenin clan. Following that, he offed himself to prevent any more violence, but as Megumi left the area, he was ambushed by Haruta. Quick reminder, Haruta is a longtime member of Mahito's group and a person who exclusively likes to fight weaker opponents. Earlier that same night, he attacked Kugisaki, Ajichi, and other minor characters, but was beaten to a pulp when an actual grade 1 sorcerer showed up. Having woken up from that, Megumi was his first victim, and considering what he went through, with opening his domain and fighting Toji, he just didn't have the strength to fight back. At the same time, Fushiguro didn't want to just die for nothing, and so he decided to at least take Haruta down with him. As we know, Megumi's curse technique gives him access to 10 Shikigami, but in order to control them, they first have to be tamed in a ritual. Throughout history, Mahoraga is the one Shikigami that's never been tamed by anyone, and that's because it has the ability to adapt to anything. The only way to kill this monster is to destroy it with an attack it's never seen, and by starting the ritual with Haruta nearby, it forced him to also fight this thing. Now, what Sukuna sensed was Mahoraga being summoned, but by the time he arrived there, Megumi had already been killed. That said, due to the nature of this ritual, his death was put on hold until the ritual was over, and the way it works is that the ritual isn't over until either Haruta dies or Mahoraga dies. Therefore, to save Fushiguro for his own plans, Sukuna had to keep Haruta alive, heal Megumi with reverse curse technique, bring him slightly back to life, and then kill the unkillable Shikigami. Of course, being the King of Curses, that's exactly what he ended up doing, because by the time Mahoraga adapted to his slashes, Sukuna destroyed it in one shot with his flames. By the end of this fight, a huge chunk of Shibuya had already been torn apart by his domain, so when you factor in the flames as well, hundreds if not thousands of civilians must have died. Following this rampage, Sukuna then took Megumi to Shoko, who was healing sorcerers nearby, and at 11:14 PM, a traumatized Yuji then regains control. In this scene, he literally throws up thinking about everyone killed by Sukuna, but he does decide to keep on fighting just because he didn't want this to be his only contribution. Now, what Yuji didn't know is that 5 minutes earlier at 11:09 PM, Todo arrived in Shibuya along with Nita from the Kyoto school. Unlike literally everyone else, these two made it to the area where Gojo was sealed, but by the time they got there, the prison realm was long gone. For that reason, their mission changed from saving Gojo to helping their allies, and over 10 minutes later they found Itadori. By this point, Yuji had already lost the will to fight, as Mihito had done pretty much everything in his power to crush his soul. In particular, the curse finished off Nanami right in front of him, used random civilians in disgusting ways, and then worst of all, killed Kugisaki with his technique. All of this combined led to Yuji having a mental breakdown, but it was Todo's arrival that changed everything. As Nita took Kugisaki away with the promise that she has a non-0% chance of surviving, it was Todo who convinced Yuji to carry on, and his technique was so disorienting that it arguably played either the biggest or second biggest part in their victory. Despite Mahito's obvious talent and his ability to learn and grow faster than any curse, it was his wariness of Todo's technique that gave Yuji the opening to defeat him with Black Flash. It should be pointed out that during the fight, Todo lost his hand and therefore couldn't use his technique, but it didn't matter since he was still able to convince Mahito that the technique would still work. After taking this hit, Mahito had nothing left to defend himself, but before Itadori could end things, the fake Geto then showed up. From the start, this guy had always wanted Gojo out the way, but for a different reason than the rest of the group. From his point of view, the existence of cursed energy has potential to create something other than just sorcerers and cursed spirits. A century ago, Noritoshi tested that theory when he created the half-cursed, half-human hybrids, but sadly, Chozo and his brothers didn't live up to expectations. In his words, everything he created was limited by his own potential, and so the solution is to create such a chaotic situation that even he can't control it. Doing this could lead to the birth of a new type of human, but to create this chaos in the first place, he first had to absorb Mahito. Thanks to Yuji beating him up, this was incredibly easy, and with the curse under his control, Fate Geto then combined him with a bunch of other cursed spirits. This move is known as a maximum technique, and in the case of Geto it's called Uzumaki, and the main benefit is that when you do this with a curse of Mahito's level, the user temporarily gains that curse's technique. With the ability to change people's souls, Noritoshi used it in a way that Mahito never could. For context, we know that Tengen has been alive for at least 1500 years, and during that time she's created several large barriers made from cursed energy. These barriers have various jobs, such as hiding the location of Jujutsu High and strengthening the curtains of other sorcerers. In this scene, what Noritoshi does is he hijacks one of Tengen's barriers, meaning that anyone inside this space can be affected by Mahito's technique. With this power, he targeted two specific types of non-sorcerers. The first type were people like Junpei, who were people born with cursed techniques, but without the body or the brain to use them. For these people, Noritoshi rewired their brains to turn them into real sorcerers, just like what Mahito did in the first season. The second type of non-sorcerer was a lot different, as it's people who've been forced to eat cursed objects. In particular, Noritoshi revealed that for the last 1,000 years, he's been secretly making deals with ancient sorcerers. When these ancient sorcerers died, their souls were then stored inside of cursed objects, just like Sukuna's finger, and the fake Geto has been feeding those objects to innocent people. One of these victims was Megami's stepsister Sumiki, but unlike Yuji, her body wasn't strong enough to be a vessel. To fix this, Noritoshi used Mahito's curse technique, meaning that now Sumiki and people like her will be in a similar situation to Itadori. Now, as if all of that wasn't enough, the fake Geto then confirmed he has plans to make all of these new sorcerers kill each other, to increase their understanding of cursed energy. Importantly, he doesn't reveal how he's forcing everyone to fight to the death, but the implication is that by making everyone have these battles, it'll lead to some kind of evolution for humanity. Moving on, the fake Geto then finally leaves Shibuya after giving his big speech, but as he does this, he releases at least 10 million cursed spirits. Not only did this allow him to escape with the Prism Realm without much trouble, but it forced the sorcerers and the government to put all their focus on helping civilians. In fact, in the anime, we see some unknown low-level politicians debating how to react, as the curses cause mass chaos in every corner of Tokyo. During this chaos, millions of people were evacuated, and the main job of the sorcerers was to protect those civilians while dealing with as many curses as possible. On top of that, to explain the need for the evacuation in the first place, the existence of cursed spirits was made public for the first time, although the government doesn't exactly tell the whole truth. The story that the evacuees were told was that cursed spirits only appear in Tokyo, and this was a strategy so that all of people's negative emotions and their negative cursed energy, it would be drawn to this one city, rather than spreading across the whole country. Naturally, the destruction of Tokyo also had a bad impact for Japan's economy, with Mei selling off all of her Japanese assets. Using her brother's technique, they were able to escape the country a lot earlier after coming dangerously close to being killed by the fake Geto. Finally, within Jujutsu Society itself, the higher-ups made 5 important declarations. With Geto seemingly being alive, the first declaration was that his death penalty was reinstated. Back in 2007, he was originally given the death penalty, but obviously Gojo chose not to kill him, and Yuki kinda just does her own thing and doesn't follow orders from Jujutsu High. Therefore, there wasn't really anyone else who could kill him, and so he was able to operate for 10 years just doing his own thing. The second declaration was that Gojo is an accomplice to everything that happened in Shibuya, and not only is he expelled from Jujutsu Society, but any attempt to free him is a crime. To put it simply, this rule was only made because the higher-ups were sick of him, since he frequently went against their wishes, interfered with politics, and saved whoever he wanted. By them making it appear that he was somehow responsible for Shibuya, the higher-ups were basically trying to preserve their own power, even if it meant sorcerers losing their greatest weapon. Anyhow, the third declaration was that Principal Yaga was sentenced to death, and this makes sense when you consider that he was the teacher to the two sorcerers currently being painted as villains. Lastly, the fourth and fifth declarations were that with Gojo being gone, Yuji is now set to be executed immediately, and Yuta Okotsu is his executioner. As a result of the whole Shibuya incident, Yuta came back to Tokyo at the request of the higher-ups, and since then he's just been going around Tokyo killing cursed spirits. Following that, the higher-ups asked him to execute Itadori, and Yuta was seemingly eager to do it, given that Suguna's rampage is why Inumaki is now missing an arm. With all that said, if you made it to the end, then thank you for watching this video, and you probably know everything you need to know before going into Season 3. Also, don't forget to turn on notifications because right now I'm working on a pretty interesting video about the worst deaths in JJK, and so yeah, if you don't want to miss that, then do turn notifications on. Thanks again for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.